Ryan Grubb, reportedly Seahawks' new OC. What's it mean for the Seahawks draft decisions? They have pick number 16, the only pick in the first 2 rounds. Now, you would think that John Schneider would trade back, but there's going to be some really tempting options there. We've all talked about Michael Penix, whether Grubb coming to Seattle means they could reach for him. But how about this? Pro Football Focus College Edition has the Seahawks in their mock draft taking at number 16, Washington offensive tackle Troy Fautanu.
Yeah, who would probably get moved to guard because he's a bit undersized at that position. You look at who the Seahawks have at guard. Damian Lewis is a free agent this year. You got to figure out what you're going to do with him. Then you have Anthony Bradford at one spot who you drafted last year. I'm looking at and I go, I wouldn't be mad at that pick. Even if you were to sign or draft him and still sign Damian Lewis, it just gives you more depth at that offensive line spot. We know that we need that there. The real question is, how much influence is Grubb going to have on the possibility of drafting Michael Penix? I don't think much. I think that it's more, tell me what you know about Penix in case he falls later in the second round, which you don't have a second-round pick, or maybe you move up into the second round, you need a guy. It's more just, let me know everything about this kid so that we can make an informed decision if it comes down to that. I don't think Penix is going to be drafted at 16. I don't think Grubb is walking in demanding that Penix is drafted at 16. I think he looks at Geno and says, I can work with that. And sometime during this draft, I expect him to grab a quarterback. I just don't know if it's going to be Penix. So it's more informative. There's no demands being made. There's no, hey, we should go this direction. Grubb is, I feel like, should be like, look, I'm just here to work. Whoever you guys throw out there, I got you. If you got questions on any of these UW guys, I can help you.
I think it's very natural, and this happens every single season. Every single time we talk about the Seahawks draft picks, you see people understandably talking about the local team. The closest team is going to be Washington, and they go, well, what about this guy? What about this guy? And sometimes you look and you go, I don't know if Jake Browning's going to be a first-rounder. You know what I mean? And then other times you look and you say, well, wait a minute. One thing that makes this year's class and this year's draft interesting is it's one of the better classes offensively that Washington has been putting out. And so there's some temptation there that's, when I see people go, well, could Michael Penix be a fit? What about Troy Fautanu? What about all these other guys? I go, I wouldn't mind it. Like, I'm on the fence about Michael Penix, but would not mind Troy at all.
No, not at all, especially with, what's been happening with the offensive line. And say what you want. We know there's been some struggles, but the Hawks have done a good job drafting O-line the last couple of years, man. You got some tackles, you got a couple guards, a guard and a center, and then, 3-4 years back, you got Damian Lewis at that guard spot. You could be on the verge of having a group of 5 who are together for 3 or 4 years. And that's what the good offensive linemen do, right? You have 3 or 4 guys on that 5-man offensive line who have been together for a while, who understand each other. So there's an opportunity here. I wouldn't mind them drafting that kid at number 16. But if you're Ryan Grubb, you're getting into this situation. One, I would assume he's extremely thankful. The climb that he's had over the past 5 to 10 years to where he is now has been great. And big ups DeBoer for bringing him along, and Grubb for performing when he got an opportunity at the University of Washington. But I think he's looking at this as an opportunity, and I'm going to coach up whoever we got here. That's one of the reasons why you leave college football, because you don't have to worry about recruiting and traveling the country and trying to influence guys to get here. You have a full department dedicated to scouting these guys. Are you going to watch film on dudes? Most definitely. But you're going to be assigned. You watch film on these 4 or 5 guys. You tell me what you think, but we're going to make the decision. You're going to be in the draft room together. You're going to be looking at the process. And that's, again, one of the disadvantages of having first-time guys is they're going to be in the draft room for the first time. Like, where do I stand? Like, where do I put my pencil? Do I sit here? Like, what do we do in between the picks? Those are some of the things that they're going to learn along the way. But thankfully, you got Frazier, you got John Schneider to lead them. So how big of an influence does Grubb have on Michael Penix? I don't think much at all, because I think that Schneider already has a plan of how he wants to attack the draft. And him and Mike McDonald have already been working together for a couple of weeks now. Grubbs is going to hop in and fill in the blanks and let you know what these players are good at and what they struggle with.
Now, you do want to make sure that you trust your coordinators, because both you and I, and I'm sure any of the other hosts, any reporters, have heard tales of certain players who were drafted because, a coordinator really, really pushed for him.
Yeah.
And sometimes those players don't end up being the best, and that coordinator ends up being gone. So you're like, okay, well, if you're going to let your coordinators have input, this needs to be a coaching staff that you trust, that you want to keep around, because the last thing you want is to move on from a coordinator and have wasted an early pick, like a day 1, day 2 pick, on someone who is clearly not a great fit for you.
Yeah, and And the Hawks are in a different position too, man. It's not like they are like desperate to turn this team around right now. You might be thin at some positions at linebacker, maybe at edge. You might want a guy there. Safety, you're trying to figure out what's going on there. But the Hawks aren't going into this draft and in desperate need for a 180. It's like, all right, let's turn the corner a little bit. Let's get better at some things. But there are some good places or good pieces that are already in place right here. So their approach is a bit different. If this were the Washington Commanders, if this were another bottom feeder team, and you need to hit on every single one, man, you might have a powwow at the table talk about, all right, guys, like we can't mess this up.
Yeah.
I would assume it's a bit different over there in VMAC because you have stars at important positions. Now, you got to get depth, but I don't imagine it being frantic in that draft from this year.
No, I mean, when I think of like where you do need a playmaker, like you need someone who is someone you don't have now.
Yeah.
I look at defense, and I think I just think you don't have as good of personnel there as the best teams in football. Like you do need that difference maker. And I understand the argument that Mike McDonald, did a lot with a defense that wasn't full of all pros and pro bowlers in Baltimore. But
They
those
have
are
some dogs.
That's
though.
the thing. They've still got really good guys. You can only use the Jadeveon Clowney example so many times before you go like, well, they also had a bunch of dudes. But that's where I see like needing personnel. With offense, there's temptation to get your quarterback. There's temptation to fix your offensive line. But like, I still believe that unit could have been better than they were last year with the exact same guys.
For sure. Stay healthy on that offensive line, and Geno perform a bit better. This is a playoff caliber team for sure.